All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's guest webinar. Great topic tonight too. Bet you can't wait to jump into it. So I have hit the record button. So for those who registered and are watching the replay, unfortunately, you will miss out on the live Q&A. But by all means, we'll make sure that we share our contact details throughout this so that you can email or get back in touch with any questions that you have. So my name's Jackie Broman. As most of you probably are aware, I'm the owner of TBA Law, and estate planning is my specialty. And we like to bring guests in to do webinars throughout the year. And tonight we've got Robb from Mont Wealth, which is very exciting. So Robb has a lot of experience in the financial market. And then has gone into wealth advising in the last 5 years or so, running his own business, Mont Wealth. So we're going to jump in and learn about how much money we need to retire. Very relevant for me too. And of course, plenty of people have jumped in and registered for this one. So now remember, just a couple of things. With Zoom, this is a webinar format. So we can't see your faces and you can't take yourself off mute at this point. There is no chat function. There is a Q&A function. So on your Zoom screen, you should be able to find that Q&A. You can put questions in throughout. Once Robb starts presenting, I'll watch those Q&As. And if something's really relevant, I'll catch Robb's attention and we'll address it straight away. But otherwise, we'll do questions at the end. You can also raise your hand, but if a question's really relevant towards the end, I can actually take you off mute and we can have a chat at the end as well. And perhaps we do that with most of you towards the end. We'll stop the recording, and those who are lucky enough live, we can actually have some to and fro with questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm handing over to Robb.
Thank you, Jackie. And thank you for everyone that's dialed in. Hopefully you've had your dinner, got some dessert or a glass of red or a white, whatever you prefer. And good to see Jackie still at work in the boardroom there. So thanks, Jackie. And so just a bit of background about me. I started in finance probably 1999 or 2000. So I've seen a few cycles: dot-com bubble bursting, the GFC, Euro debt crisis, COVID, and here we are now. I'm 45 years old, married, 2 kids. So, mortgage paying. Now trying to plan for retirement and advising people at the same time. So let's just talk about, what we try and do is provide clients with an investment edge, and we look at how much money you do need to retire. So if we go to the next slide, Jackie, I can't move the next slide. There we go. Here we go. Okay. General advice. Just making sure that everyone's aware any information presented is of general nature only and has been prepared without considering your relevant personal circumstances. Those acting upon information without first consulting a financial advisor does so entirely at their own risk. Okay, so tonight's agenda, we're going to talk about superannuation and your contributions. Have a think as well how much monthly income you need in retirement, what kind of income you need to live that lifestyle you deserve. Maximising your returns and super contribution strategies. What I'm going to do is, because we weren't too sure exactly the demographic of those dialing in today, so I'm going to work on a couple of scenarios: 35-year-olds, 45-year-olds, and 55-year-olds, to give us a sense of how you can get to that number that we're looking at. A lot like what the industry funds do, they compare the pair. So we'll compare some scenarios. We'll talk about the changing investment landscape and what that means for you, and also how we at Mont Wealth can help you. So let's talk about superannuation. For those that aren't aware, so your employer pays at the moment in FY24 11% of your salary into super, 11.5% in FY25, and it'll grow to 12% in FY26, and that'll cap out for a period there. Now, non-concessional contributions are post-tax. Now, you can contribute more into super if you want. Now, Jackie and I were talking earlier about mortgages. Now, if you've got excess capital, you probably want to pay off your mortgage faster than putting into super. We can talk about some strategies around that, but you're allowed to put 110,000 per annum or 330,000 3-year bring forward. Now, there's also a downsizer contribution where you sell your home and then you can contribute the tax-free number or amount into your superannuation, and you can do 300,000 per spouse. That's not part of the non-concessional. That's separate. There are a couple of rules around that. You have to be over the age of 55. you have to have owned your home for 10 years, and you have to contribute the money within 90 days of settlement. Now, so then once you get to retirement, you can do the transfer balance cap, which is a tax-free element up to $1.9 million in your pension. And anything above that is taxed at 15%. Now, the government more recently has proposed a new tax above $3 million. Now, there aren't that many people that have got superannuation balances above $3 million, but those that do, it's a big burden on the government, and they're looking at ways of generating revenue. So they're looking at taxing those numbers above $3 million. So just be mindful of that coming up and any legislative changes. So let's talk about a comfortable retirement. That looks nice, that photo, doesn't it? So ASFA is the Association of Super and Finance of Australia. Now, there's two groups here. There's comfortable retirement and there's modest retirement. Now, this group have done the study and they've had a look at what it costs or what kind of income you need if you're a single to have, what they consider comfortable retirement. Now, singles, 50,000 roughly, and for couples, it's about 71,000. Now, for a modest retirement, singles, roughly 32, and couples 46,000. So, I mean, once we go through the criteria of what they consider, you can see the daily essentials, groceries, transport, clothing. But once we go deeper into this, what this number actually means, it'll surprise you and potentially shock you. Now, comfortable retirement, according to this group, is top-level private health insurance, doctor specialist visits, and pharmacy needs. Well, yes, that's a non-negotiable. Fast, reliable internet, telco subscription, computer, Android, mobile streaming service. Yeah, sure, you could probably live without streaming, but unless that's reliable. No, Jackie, you need streaming. Okay, great. Own a reasonable car insurance, maintenance, upkeep. Yep, tick that. Regular leisure activities, including club memberships, cinema visits, exhibitions, dance, and yoga. Yep. Home repairs, updates, and maintenance to kitchen and bathroom appliances over 20 years. Yep, that sounds pretty reasonable. Now, regular professional haircuts. Now, I probably don't need a regular professional haircut. Jackie, you probably would like one. You don't need one, but you probably want one going forward. Confidence to use air conditioning in home and afford all utilities. Now, that's a key word. They use the word confidence. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical about what that actually means. Now, the occasional restaurant meal, home delivery meal, and takeaway coffee. Now, occasional definition is infrequent. Infrequent restaurant visits, home delivery meals, and takeaway coffee. The ability to replace worn-out clothing and footwear items, modest wardrobe updates. Now, Jackie, I know you're quite fashionable, so you probably want to do a little bit more than that. And this is the really interesting one. Now, in retirement, they are considering a comfortable retirement is an annual domestic airfare to visit family and one overseas airfare every 7 years. So you get to the age of 65, exactly, one overseas airfare every 7 years. Now, that if you go back to this here, that's $70,000 a couple and $50,000 for singles. That doesn't really leave me warm and fuzzy about my retirement. I really want to work a little bit harder to achieve it. So what are you missing? Well, it doesn't say anything about being able to spoil the kids, spoil the grandkids. As we discussed, unrestricted domestic travel, unrestricted international travel, unrestricted lunches, unrestricted dinners, confidence, more than confidence to use the air conditioner. And we do know about global warming and global cooling, so it's getting hotter and colder. Now, golf memberships, bowls memberships, I know they mentioned memberships, but that's something that I really want to do as I get older. Unrestricted shopping, and also the point that you want to leave something behind for, either legacy for the next generation or philanthropy, donate money to charities that you so want to. So let's have a look at what this actually means. So $50,000 today for a single. Now, if you remain single over 10 years, so if you're currently 55 and you want to retire at 65, you'll need $67,000 of income. In 20 years, so if you're 45, wanted to retire in 20 years, that's $90,000 income, and $121,000 in 30 years for those that are 35 years old. Now, for those couples, $70,000, I'll fast forward all the way to 30 years, you'll need $170,000 at 3% inflation per annum, equates to $170,000, which is $70,000 equivalent today. So if you go back again here, that's what it means. This is the comfortable standard of retirement that you're working towards. Now, it might shock you, but at least it prepares you and warns you to start planning for your retirement. And maybe you deserve something a little bit better, and don't just hope for the best, because you're going to need a little bit more than that to have an enjoyable one and deserve it. So if we have a look at this, obviously where we are now. So as we discussed, what does that single and couples income require? If you're 65, that's close to $6,000 for a couple. And if you're 55, in 10 years' time, that comfortable retirement will need $8,000 per month. 45, so in 20 years, that's $11,000. As you can see, what the purchasing power does, it really does impact at a rate of 3% inflation, the purchasing power in time. So this is what we've got to work towards, this larger capital base to then generate the income going forward. Hopefully not spooking too many people, Jackie, to start, and maybe have another glass of wine. But if you look forward, and if you're a little bit like me and say, well, you know what, I wouldn't mind living off $10,000 a month. I'm currently 45, and as you can see, I'm married, and I would need $20,000 of income per month to live a lifestyle of $10,000 per couple per month now. So just start thinking about what you might need. So if you're 35, potentially 25, 55, 14,000 for couples, and you can see that number there. So I'll keep moving forward from this point. So let's have a look at some case studies. So as I said earlier, I'll do 2 case studies per age bracket, just in case there's different demographics on the call, so you kind of get a sense of where we're at. So if Amanda's 35 years old today, she's got a super balance of $100,000, and her employer contributes $2,000 per month. Assuming Amanda wants and targets 8% return for the next 30 years, she'll get to $3.8 million. Now, Amanda is comfortable with risk, and she can retire comfortably with $3.8 million in her super. But a more conservative 6% per annum return equals 2.5. You can see the red line and the white line difference there. It's a big difference. That works out to be about $1.3 million difference over 30 years, just by ticking the box to be a bit more growthy as opposed to conservative. Now, again, this is just general advice. Please go and seek professional advice rather than just, as I say, ticking a box. But you can see here, as Amanda reaches at the age of 65, $3.8 million, she can live comfortably on $18 per month in today's money to enjoy her retirement. At the age of 80, I've assumed that she'll probably need some money to move into aged care, and then so we take out $1 million, but then her balance still grows. If she starts with 2.5 million, you can see that once she gets to 80, then we'll take out $1 million for aged care, and suddenly she's run out of money. You can see that by the time 25 years into retirement and she gets to the age of 90, the difference is more than $8 million difference, all because it starts here. An 8% return versus a 6% return. That's the capital base. That's what she's working towards, and she doesn't do anything other than her employer contribute $2,000 and generate 8% return versus a 6% return. There you go. There's a difference for Amanda. Now, what about John? Now, John starts with the same balance, $100,000. Now, John doesn't care too much. He's just living life. He's loving life. He earns a half decent salary, and his employer contributes $1,000 a month up until the age of 65. Now, John didn't really care too much about his super. He just ticks the box and says, I'm a little bit more balanced. So I'll target 6% return. And so he looks at his super when he gets to 65 and says, oh no, I've only ended up having $1.55 million. So his risk bias or his negligence has cost him $850,000 in retirement. An 8% return would have got him 2.4. And as you can see here, so he starts with 1.5, and because the balance is reinvested and what he draws out, and all he's able to take out is $50,000 per annum in today's money. And now all of a sudden that runs out by the time he's 83 as he's moved into aged care. And so he goes into deficit. And that's fine. The government will support him. He'll get the pension. But as you can see, if he had to just tick the box and work towards $2.4 million, he could have lived a much better lifestyle. Suddenly, by the time he gets to 90, he's got a balance of $4.5 million, and he can do whatever he would like with it. He can pass it on, donate it, do what he'd like, or even spoil himself even more and drive fancier cars or go on better holidays and change his wardrobe, whatever he wanted to do. So let's have a look at Jessica. She's 45, $500,000 balance. Her employer contributes $1,000 a month up to the age of 65, and she invests in a balanced fund returning 6%. At 6%, it equates to $2 million roughly, 2.057 exactly. At 5% income, once she gets into retirement, she can generate about $100,000 per annum, but needs $90,000 to live that comfortable retirement that we discussed earlier, okay? So that's not too bad, but remember, that's still that comfortable that ASFA is talking about that you can live off. Had she invested in 8% per annum, the outcome is $2.9 million, a difference of, $900,000. So on that alone, at 5%, she can generate $145,000 of income, and that's much more enjoyable lifestyle. Again, she's 45 years old. Have a look at how your money's being invested. Target that 8% return as opposed to 6% return. Your bias could be impacting your outcome in your retirement. As we move to the next page and we see what happens in retirement here. So the 2 million versus the 2.9, look, she's still living an okay retirement, but remember, at $2 million, she's only affording to live that comfortable lifestyle or retirement that the government's recommending. Had she gone to 2.9, she could have lived a much better lifestyle, but then also had another $1.2 million by the time she had to 90. Again, do with it what you like, spend more money in between, enjoy your lifestyle, enjoy your retirement, and it's all because of the 6% versus the 8%. Nothing different. So now looking at a couple, Michael and Jennifer, 45. They've got a $500,000 super balance, and they each contribute $1,000 per month from their employer contributions up to the age of 65. They're targeting $120,000 of income, just like me, $120,000 of income in today's money, which equates to $240,000 per annum in 20 years. They are growth investors, and they're happy to take 8% return as you would, and that gets them to $3.4 million. The alternative was 2.5. So let's see how it works out. So at $3.4 million, they take out the $240 of income per annum, or equivalent of $10,000 per month today. Had they settled at 6%, albeit they'd still have a half decent balance at the end, they've actually got much more that they can pass on to the next generation, or as I said earlier, donate, whatever they like to do, and live that lifestyle that they deserve. Again, comfortable. The difference at the start is $900,000, and you can see what difference it does at the end, 1.2. This assumes, as I said before, assumes that the balance or capital is reinvested, generating a 3% return and distributes 5% income. And this is Lisa and David, 55 years old. They've got $1.2 million in super, and their employer contributes $2,000 per month up until the age of 65. A 6% return is 2.5. Had they taken the more risk at the age of 55 and targeted an 8% return, they'd retire at 65 with $2.5 million in super. So then, as you can see here, Lisa and David, 2.9, 2.5. Again, they take money out for aged care. At the end, when they're 90, or not even at the end, they might still be living. You just don't know. They've got 3.1 versus the 600,000. Again, the difference is $2.5 million, all because this point here, 6% versus 8%. So what retirement amount should you be targeting? So for those that are comfortable with that scenario that we painted earlier around the comfortable retirement for a 70,000 for couples and 50,000 for singles, if you are the current age of 65, then the couple should have around $1.4 million of income generating assets. For a single, it's about $1 million. For 55-year-olds, it's 1.8 for couples, and for singles, about 1.3. For 45-year-olds, 2.5 is the capital required, and then for singles, 1.8. And for those that may or may not be on the call, 35-year-olds that are starting to think about retirement, you'll need about 3.4 as a couple and 2.4 for singles. So this assumes 3% inflation rate per annum. So as you can see, the younger you are, the more capital you're going to need to generate that income and live that lifestyle today. But for those that require a little bit more, so those that are looking like me, wanting $10,000 a month per couple in today's dollars, or $7,000 for singles at 3% inflation, at the age of 65, you're probably going to need close to 2.4 for a couple and 1.7 for a single. 55, you need 3.4, and the list goes on. So you can see those numbers there. So I'm 45, I'm targeting that $4.6 million number, and my strategy is that I'm going to get there with my superannuation contributions and my 8% target of returns. My wife and I will be able to achieve that $4.6 million. If you're 35, you can see the number's 6.1 or 6.2. And if you're 25, you'll need $8 million to generate today's $10,000 per month. It can be done. It looks a bit far-fetched, but it can be achieved with growth and distributions and contributions. So, as I said earlier, can the 45 achieve their goal? Yes, they can. You'll need $500,000 base to start, and you and your partner can contribute $1,000 each and generate that 8% return. And that's assuming after taxes and costs and fees, obviously, and you'll get to your $4.6 million number. Now, for a 55-year-old, you'll start with where your balance should be around about $1 million at that point if you want to achieve that outcome. You'll need to contribute $2,000 each monthly contribution from your employer, but then hopefully by then at the age of 55, maybe the kids may be working a little bit more. They can fund their own expenses and lifestyle. School fees are done. You've worked off the mortgage and you're in a much better position now. You start contributing $1,500 each as making non-concessional contributions, and you target that 8% return, and there you go, you got the 3.4. So you can see there are strategies on how to get there, and we haven't even spoken about the downsides yet. So if you're a little bit behind that $1 million number at 55 as a couple, and let's say you're at 700,000 or 600,000, if at the age of 55 years old or 60, you decide, you know what, let's sell the house, downsize, contribute $300,000 each, that's 600,000, and you move out a few suburbs, it can be done. So there are ways of achieving it. So other ways, salary sacrifice, if you see fit. As I said, non-concessional contributions. It doesn't have to be $3,000. It could be $4,000. It could be $5,000, depending on what target you're trying to achieve for your retirement and how you want to get there. And then obviously, as we discussed, the downsides of contributions. So compare the pair. And I've done a bit of comparison already, but if we have a look at B1 and B2, 35 years old, and then we start with their balance, $2,000 per month contribution, 6% return versus 8% return, you can see the difference is $1.3 million. All it is 8%, the power of compounding versus 6%. Same time, 45 years old, with your balance at 500,000, you contribute $2,000 per month, 6% return versus 8% return. 20 years later, the difference is almost $1 million. All because of 8% versus 6%. And then finally, for the 55-year-olds with a starting balance a bit higher, you can see the difference is $400,000 over 10 years if you retire. And obviously, if you work that extra year or a couple extra years, it makes a big difference, or you contribute more money into it, makes a big difference, as we saw earlier. So there are ways of generating that return to get you to your outcome. So what I've created here is a QR code. If anyone's online at the moment or watching the replay and you wanted to ask myself, let me know what your starting balance is, how much you want to contribute or how much you think you can contribute, and then I can give you a bit of a scenario set of where that might take you. Now, the outcome is obviously the 8%, the 6%. So it all depends on how you can generate that return and where it can be. So I might pause there for a sec, Jackie. I'll have a drink and see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Rob. Going super well. Yes, just a reminder for everyone, use the Q&A button on Zoom. I think everyone's just captivated because your pace is great, and everyone's like, oh my God, actually I could get there. No, I can't get there. It's like so much tension.
Well, do you think, Jackie, you can get there?
Oh, it's making me really nervous.
So this is the best part. There are ways of achieving that number because as we've discussed, like you can contribute salary sacrifice, you can make non-concessional, your employer already contributes, you can make the 8% return, you get to your 55 or your 60 and you start thinking, you know what, I don't need this big house anymore, my kids have moved out or I've paid off the mortgage, now I'll downsize, I'll contribute more, I can even put in more money if I need to. You can get there, work a couple more years, and you can quite easily achieve what you need to. And I'll highlight now what's going, like if there aren't any questions, I'll keep moving forward. And I wanted to leave the QR code up there so people, if they want to ask any questions, they're more than welcome to. So if we move forward from here, let's have a look here. The changing investment landscape and what worked in the past may not work in the future. So if we look here, this is interesting because just the other day, the intergenerational report was released by the government and Treasury, and they're forecasting that 40 million people will live in Australia by 2063. And that's compared to 26 million in 2022. So roughly 50% growth in 40 years. Now, we know there's already a housing shortage, so where are these people going to live? So what they're bringing in clearly is allowing skilled young migrants to lower the age in the demographic of Australia and support government and tax receipts. Now, this is the reason why they're bringing in skilled labour. If you're earning $125,000, you're paying probably $30,000 of income to the government, which is the largest contributor of government receipts is income tax. The other problem that we've got in Australia is, as I discussed earlier, is that we're living longer. So the life expectancy increases by 2063 for men, almost 87 versus currently 81, and for women, 89 versus current 85. So that's why we need money longer, which also puts the burden on aged care and the healthcare system. And then, as I was talking about, we're getting older. The population over the age of 65 increases from current 16% to 23% in 2063. And you can kind of think, well, there's a couple of things here that stand out to me. Where are these people going to live? So that puts support on the housing market. And then secondly, if there's a larger burden on aged care and health, who's going to pay for that? So one interesting piece coming out of the intergenerational report is that they expect the economy will grow by an average of 2.2% per year in real terms over the next 40 years, compared to 3.1% over the past 40 years. Now, that has a big pass-on effect to all assets, because if you think about the rate of change, that's roughly 30% less growth. So 30% less growth on top-line revenue. So if a company grows at 10%, it's only going to start growing at 7%. So you've got to find other ways of making money, or generating profits, and that's got to be by bringing costs down. Now, the Federal Reserve also released a paper recently called "An End of an Era," and if you want to look me up on LinkedIn, I've got a link on that. I sent it out a few months ago. But they talk about the coming long-run slowdown in corporate profit growth and stock returns. Now, the lower interest expense. Now, if for those of you remember, 1990s, there was interest rates of close to 20%. Lower interest rate expenses and corporate tax rates mechanically explain over 40% of the real growth in corporate profits from 1989 to 2019. In addition, the decline in the risk-free rate, which is the bond yield or interest rates, accounts for all of the expansion in price to earnings multiples. It tells you that what worked in the past might not necessarily work in the future. So the boost to profits and valuations from ever declining interest and corporate tax rates is unlikely to continue, indicating significantly lower profit growth and stock returns in the future. So as I said, they're forecasting GDP growth for the next 40 years of 2.2%. Now, all this information is in that intergenerational report. It's about a 260-pager, so I've gone through and had a look. So part of the reasons why growth slows is because you've got this aging population. That'll lead to lower productivity. We'll have fragmented globalization, which means following the supply chain issues and China, COVID, and Russia, less people want to rely on the globe to make things. We are going to what they call is reshore or friendshore. We want to make sure that things are made where we're comfortable, that we know we can get access to them when we can. So what that does is create inflation. And we've also got this burden of global warming too, which will make electricity more expensive, will make fruit and veg harder to come by, and make just life more difficult for everybody. At the same time, and again, this is part of the intergenerational report, the federal budget moves into deficit and remains in deficit. Look at that chart, the bar chart beyond this year, when we're popping champagne about the surplus that we've created. So health and care services are part of the reason. Defence, slower economic growth equals slower tax receipts, which obviously is going to be a burden for the income earners and higher taxes. So you can see here as well, this is another issue that I've been flagging to my clients more recently, is around superannuation. So it's the government's one of its biggest expenditures, because those, as I said earlier, those people that have got more than $3 million in super and they're only paying 15% tax on gains, it's a detriment to the government revenue. So that's why they're targeting superannuation. Now, it would be a political suicide if they try to target family home tax exemptions. But look at the next one, rental deductions. That could be something they'd start targeting as part of, trying to claw back some of this revenue.
Death taxes.
And death taxes. It's coming. There's no doubt about it. So get your house in order. So, as I discussed, the changing investment landscape. And some of the other things that are starting to structurally change compared to then. So if you go 1980 to 2020, there was disinflation. There was no inflation to speak of. Rates were trending down and asset prices were growing. And that's part of it because rates were so low, we could afford to take risk and get debt. Now, we look forward beyond 2020, inflation. Now, how long it stays high, I don't know the answer to that. Higher rates will, from given where they were 2% only less than 18 months ago to where they are now, closer to 6 or 7%, maybe closer to 6%. And that's going to lead to lower growth and returns. So baby boomers are retiring. We had all these people with double incomes, which they then took on larger levels of debt. I mean, the house valuation to income went from 2 times to now 6 times. That's all because of debt. As I said earlier, globalization is shifting to reshoring. That's inflationary. Technology and innovation, well, that's deflationary. That's a positive. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, no one really cared about fossil fuels and there was cheap energy. Now we're switching to renewables, more expensive. That's inflationary. I spoke earlier about cheap debt. Now it's rising interest costs, and that's a burden for even state government. We know there's plenty of talk today about the government debt that we're holding. So we went from disinflation to now inflation, and then over the top of that, we've got a market cycle. So at the moment, we're in a downturn. Whether in a recession or not, it doesn't really matter too much. The cycle is trending lower, and that's the main point. So then how can we help? So we've had a look at all these factors, and we think about, well, how do we want to position portfolios if the world has changed? So we've done 2 things. We've created an investment committee, myself, Vesla Tasker from Greenwood & Co. and Jay Kumar from Force Analytics. We get together on a monthly basis and ask the question, what's changed? So we've created these strategic portfolios where we're targeting 8% return per annum, magic number. And what we decide is when we can afford to be balanced and when we can afford to be growth. So offensive or defensive, now very much defensive. And at the same time, once we get into retirement, the income portfolio, so we're trying to generate a return of the RBA cash rate plus 3%. So at the moment, the RBA cash rate's 4.1 plus 3% gives you 7.1% income distribution. So why have we changed our tune on some of the asset classes? Well, as I discussed earlier, the global GDP growth forecasts are below trend. So the next 10 years. Interest rates and bond yields are above trend. So that's going to be impact to asset appreciation. And then the starting asset valuations are above long-term trend. So you can see the forecast, and we've compared this to all other research houses and broking houses and determined, well, we're not far off the mark. So this is where we actually expect growth rates to be in some of these asset classes. And you can see down the very bottom, private credit is probably the most attractive, and you've probably read a little bit about it in the media more recently, but it's a very attractive asset class at the moment. Again, this is just general advice. Please speak to a financial advisor before you make a move into private credit, but it's something that we're discussing heavily in our group. And so this is another thing that we like to assess. And it's a bit of a noisy chart, but let me break it down into parts. So you can see the far left, the inflation. Now the target is in the green, at 2 to 3%. The red bar is where we are at the moment above target. So we're at 6.1% of inflation rate. And we can see that we've actually come off a long way from peak at 8.5. Now the RBA has pushed their rates up from where they were, 2 years ago of 0.1%. They've pushed it all the way up to 4.1. Now the bank passes on their costs and makes their profit, and that's what they call net interest margin, and that sits current bank or debt costs at around 5.5 to 5.7%. And you can see across the many dwarfs there, what you really want to target is the largest dwarfs. These are the ones that are generating the most income and larger than the cost of debt. Cash at the moment around 3%. That was 0.1. Property yields are around 3.5. And that's even before you start considering costs associated with management and even land tax. US government bonds are sitting at about 4 to 4.3% at the moment. Term deposits 4.5. Global infrastructure is generating about 5. Corporate bonds 6 to 7%. ASX high yield 7 to 7.5%. That includes the franking. So if you exclude the franking, it's back to where the ASX 200 is around 4.5. And this is the real estate debt sitting at about 9 and private credit about 9%. So these are attractive asset classes down the other end. But you can see we've still got a lot of work to do on the inflation piece. It's got to come back down to 3%. The RBA is saying they'll get there by late 2025. They're trying to smooth it out. They're not trying to impact unemployment too much. They're trying to keep the rate high and have a soft landing. But it's going to be a volatile period.
Rob, while you're looking at those things, you're going part way to answering a question that Mark put in there, because Mark was talking about, because you were talking about the difference between a 6% and an 8% will make. But then Mark sort of said, yeah, but what about the higher risk if you're looking for a higher percentage return? And I suppose looking at these asset classes starts helping us understand what we're looking at to think about getting to that 8% and how risky they may or may not be. And maybe if you can talk a little bit to that, because I think you were going to go into some other asset classes with another graph in a minute, but yeah.
I was. Thank you, Mark. Great question. Because what we've done historically, we could just set and forget. Now, Mark probably knows that, you could do, if you were in growth, it was 30% defensive, 70% growth. And it worked because rates were coming down. Asset prices were going up. It worked perfectly. But because we're not getting that same amount of growth, we have to think about how do we change? How do we generate growth doing other things? So you can see now this is how we factor it. We look at, this green is shares, global shares, Australian shares. It only makes up 40% of what we do now because we think we can get equity-like returns in real estate debt and private credit. Now, again, this is just general advice. I'm just speaking out loud. Go and seek financial advice on these asset classes. But if you find the right money manager like we have, they take 100% security on what they lend. So very limited risk of losing money on this investment in who we've selected. So again, this is just general information. Come and speak to me if you'd like to learn more. But we view that these guys can generate 8 to 9% return, which gives us that long-term structural 8% growth. And we can see in this purple area here that corporate lending, real estate debt, and global private credit and equity, we're getting that return. That makes up 20% of the portfolio. And on global bonds and Australian bonds, as we highlighted here, we're getting Australian government bonds 4.1, but on corporate bonds, we're getting 6 and 7%. So blended, we're getting close to 6. At the same time, what we've done is we've selected the best money managers in Australian equity income that are getting us that Australian ASX high yield. You can see there the franking benefit. And if you're in superannuation, SMSFs, retirement, the benefit comes straight back to you because you're not really paying as much tax at 15% in accumulation mode. So you're really taking home 7% income on being invested in Australian blue chip equity income. Again, this is just general information. I'll keep saying it. So general advice. So you can see here, Mark, that we've created this portfolio that we think, we think we can still target that 8% growth by having allocation like this, where we're not reliant on equity or capital growth, where we're getting it from income. Same can be said about global infrastructure. Now, the global infrastructure money manager that we've selected, they identify which global infrastructure assets are able to pass on inflation costs to the underlying consumer, whether it's business or consumer, utility costs. So you're getting 5% earnings growth and you're getting 5% income. As you can see here, global infrastructure, 5% income. So you're getting 4 to 5% capital growth and 5% income. So this is how we've made up the portfolio. Now, that is in this market where we're being quite defensive. Now, Mark, what we would do in a more willing or enabled, or if the market looked like, we've bottomed out or valuations were too good to ignore, we would tilt this portfolio and change it. We have to be active. You can't just sit and forget when the market's like this, because then we'd miss out on performance and helping us retire. So we might generate in this market maybe 4 to 6% return. But at the same time, when the market turns and we start thinking that we're going to get capital growth, we could potentially get 10 to 12% capital growth. At the same time, on the income portfolio, it's completely different to what we're so used to. There's diversification across multi-assets where we're trying to find non-correlated asset classes to generate those returns that we desire for our retirement, to get to retirement, but also to live that comfortable lifestyle that we want to live in. So hopefully, Mark, that's answered your question.
I think it's also really great highlighting just your experience, Rob, in financial markets, because it makes a huge difference for you moving into, the financial planning and advice, as opposed to other financial planners who might just have grown up in a bank and then just sell set products. Like, you're actually looking at all this stuff and making something yourself. It's
Yeah, thanks,
incredible.
Jackie. That's a nice lead. So to give you a perfect example, so I worked on the well, they call it the floor, institutional stockbroker for Citigroup during the GFC, and that was such an uncertain time. I mean, 10 years of, or probably 5 years of a bull market. The reason before it fell off was September 11, but then it recovered because the US was stimulating. And what happened at that point was the market just crashed. The indicator or the reason why you wanted to get back in the market was when central banks cut rates and started buying assets. They called it the TARP. They were buying assets. Now, when COVID hit, the Reserve Bank, US Federal Reserve, they all cut rates and then government started stimulating. Now, if anyone remembers, it was March 23rd, roughly, was when the market bottomed. But it was about a week before then when the government started stimulating. We started buying that week. Now, it wasn't because we thought it was the bottom. It was because the central banks and governments started saying, we are buying assets. We are stimulating the market. And that was the trigger. Now, I can't see any point now when we've got so much debt already and inflation's a problem that they're going to stimulate. Without that stimulus, we're probably going to trade range between, up and down 3-5% for the next couple of years. It's happened before, 2012 through to 2015. So we're looking for income as a result. You need to be patient and we will generate some really good returns at the right time of the cycle, but now's not the right time to be aggressive. So thanks, Jackie. And so in summary, because now we've probably been 45 minutes and I might open it up for any questions if there are any. So in summary, have a think about what retirement do you deserve? What action plan are you going to put together to achieve it? And will your risk bias impact your retirement outcome for better or worse? So then also have a think about the assets that performed in the past might not work in the future. Now, I'll elaborate a little bit on that. As I said earlier, stocks might not perform the way like they have. And property and investment properties might not perform the way like they have because the governments have got so much debt and they're going to tax the wealthy, and land tax is one way they're going to do that. And for those Victorians that have dialed in, 50% of Victorian state revenue comes from property taxes. So not only do we look at asset classes and stocks and bonds and all these things, we have a view on multi-assets to help you determine how you're going to get your best returns. So if you would like to join the mailing list, I do a daily email and I also do a weekend big picture stuff as well. Talk about strategies or asset allocations or interviews with fund managers, whatever you like. Please scan the QR code, send me an email and join the distribution list and happy to help. And Jackie, over to you if there's any questions.
There's another question from Sean, but I just want to encourage people to use the Q&A button and we'll answer some, but then we will end the recording and we'll allow a little bit of chat. So for those who are on live, they get the extra bonus of being able to do that. So Sean's question was back to when you were looking at the modest versus comfort levels that APFSA or whatever they're called put out there. And Sean is saying, presumably or preferably, you will have paid off your mortgage as well, and you're not paying a mortgage out of that comfort or modest level. And I suppose then my comment is, well, not necessarily, because if you haven't paid it off and your couple's income then is 70,000 and you're still having to pay a mortgage out of the 70,000, then your lifestyle is probably at the modest level, isn't it? Even though your income's at the comfortable level.
Yeah, so there's a little asterisk down the very bottom there. It says for retirees aged 65 to 84 who own their own home. So yeah, you're right. I mean, the other thing is, like, I'm not sure what council rates are rising at. You can see there the top of housing point is council rates. So, I know what my council rates are, and almost makes up 4 or 5% of my couple's income in today's money.
Yeah,
so
and
that's a big number already.
If a lot of people who jumped on, if they do live in the Strathbogie region, we're always saying Strathbogie as a regional charges more on a rate than the people who are living in Toorak.
Wow, that's crazy. So it does. I mean, as you can see, for modest, I haven't seen the criteria for modest for singles and couples, but you can kind of see you're probably not allowed to travel at all.
No, modest would be, well, and then that's not, I mean, then if you look at what you have to, your lifestyle has to be if you have to rely on a Centrelink pension, I mean, that's just miserable, isn't it, really?
Well, it is. I mean, we're not trying to be obnoxious about it at all, but we're just
No,
saying for those people that are on the call that are 35, 45, or even 55,
yeah.
there are strategies you can put in place. It's not too late. It's never too late to start thinking about what your retirement looks like, and work towards that number.
And I
And
think that's part of the thing. Let's turn it around and have a little bit more hope, because I'm feeling a little bit anxious as well. I'm like, how am I going to get to $3.5 million when, and to be honest, like, my super isn't great. My husband's is better. And isn't that typical of the pay gap and, women having less? And I haven't had maternity leave, let alone other women who do have big gaps in their income. So it's nice in some ways that you are looking at a couple. But then also you think about how many couples have had separations. And so they're, and have to rebuild and start again.
it's very hard. Yes. And as a financial advisor, I'd recommend you try to live in different rooms. I was saying that facetiously, but you're right. It is tough. You can't, I mean, for reasons, you can't live together. That's fair enough too. That does make it hard. But obviously, my assumptions assume no pension. Okay. So it's working towards that number without having to get a pension. And so, and as I've said, part of my assumptions on growth rates, part of it is trying to be more flexible as to when to be offensive and when to be defensive. Now, if you can look after your capital in periods of volatility, like we're in at the moment, then when the market does turn, you're doing more than 8% a year because you're protecting it. There's going to be periods of the market where there's another bull market and you need to chase it. It's not different this time. It's always the same, but you just need to be more defensive right now. That's my recommendation to my clients. And unfortunately, when you're looking at your super balances going forward, like last year was good, but my recommendation for people is, hey, it's going to get tough for a year or so, but let's focus on the income generation from other asset classes where we can deliver that 8% return, and even if it's 5 or 6% compared to the market, I mean, for a perfect example, the Nasdaq. I know we're filming on the 29th of August 2023, but the Nasdaq is down 7% for the month of August. That's a huge move down. So for anyone that's sitting in that growth phase with that 70-30 portfolio, you'll be down for the financial year to start. We're not, because we knew that this was going to be part of the problem, but it's going to be volatile. There's some great businesses in the Nasdaq. You just got to find them, and we've selected the right managers to identify who they are.
I think Mark's going to have some great comments once I take him onto speaker as well, once I unmute him, but he's got another good question in here. But before I go to his question, I just had a question around your general opinion about how I feel that a lot of people get stuck on thinking they need an investment property and that's the sort of thing that they think is going to build their wealth. And yet, again, just sharing some of my opinion, particularly with the new legislation around residential tenancy, the returns for landlords and the requirements that they have and the way tenants can just do whatever they want, is it as good as a investment asset class as what a lot of people assume or traditionally we've believed?
I've been a property bear, given my background is stocks, for a long time. However, about 3 years, I changed my mind. 3 years ago, I changed my mind. And the main reason for that is population growth. Now, there's a massive housing shortage, and this is just general, massive housing shortage, which means there's going to be demand for established. Now, very topical too is construction costs. Now, it's much easier to buy an existing than build. And that's why you're seeing people bidding aggressively to buy an existing property, because they know the headaches of building something new. However, part of that reason why from the 1980s to 2020 that asset prices grew was because debt costs came down. And we were able to take on more debt over 30 years. Now, here's a stat for you. I don't have it in. There's so much information, and unfortunately, I only had so many slides. So in 1991, when interest rates were 18%, even at 18%, household incomes only contributed 20% of their income to pay off debt.
Mm.
Today, interest costs are 6%, and that number is 35%.
Mm.
So the question is, how much more debt can we take on?
Mm.
That's my only concern. Now, as I said earlier as well, the other thing is that the government has got so much debt and 50% of their revenue comes from property taxes.
Mm.
That's land tax or stamp duty or whatever it might be. There's no incentive to own an investment property because all you're going to do is get taxed. Now, we might not feel wealthy because we own one investment property, but that's not how the government sees it. The government sees it as, hey, you've got more than one property, we want to tax you. Because the Greens are voting for rent cap freezes.
Mm.
Now, what does that do to your returns? Now, does that disincentivize people to want to buy an investment property?
Mm.
No, you wouldn't want to buy one. So you think about all these things. There were reasons why investors wanted to buy properties over the last 20, 30 years because there was negative gearing, asset prices were going up, debt costs were fine, we could manage it. But our generation, Gen X, we've got so much debt already in our primary place of residence, we physically can't afford more debt.
Mm.
And that's the biggest concern I have. Look, asset prices will probably go up by the rate of inflation, 3 to 5%. That's fine. You'll get 2.5% post costs of your income distribution, but I tell you what, you don't have a headache of a tenant. You don't have a headache of maintenance. You get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning because the hot water service burst. And look, I'm all for tenants having rights, but you're the landlord. You've put the risk in to buy the asset. Why did they get so much more rights than the landlord does?
Mm.
That's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah,
Like
I'm with you, Mark. Almost high five. So yes, Mark's question, because Mark's talking a little bit about death taxes as well. So he has asked, how do you propose to keep most of your super balance still intact upon death, particularly in light of some of what the Greens are voting for and death taxes aimed at super balances? But before you launch into that, I don't think that they'll ever touch too much the transfer of assets between spouses on death. So when you're thinking about death taxes, it's going to be when both parents have died and it's transferring to the next generation. Whereas at the moment, everyone is actually incentivized to transfer wealth on death, but that incentive will flip or it'll be just as hard on the next generation to get that wealth. It won't necessarily just be super. It's going to be you're going to be taxed on land transfers, on cash transfers. At the moment, there's no tax at all. So we don't know what they're going to do. We're crystal balling a bit, but there's something.
Yeah, we are crystal balling. And so I've told my clients to get your house in order, which means go and see a tax specialist and start thinking about the vehicles you want to use to transfer assets. Now, if it's already set up and you've got elderly parents and there's going to be a transfer coming, or they've got cash or whatever it might be, like, you're allowed a gift. So they can't tax gifts. So make sure that's in writing. I gift so-and-so X amount. I mean, this is just general advice. Go and speak to a tax specialist or an estate planning specialist. The other thing that is part of it is that, but then also you can do joint tenancy. So think about if you want to buy assets for the next generation or whatever it might be, you start thinking it that way, or buying assets in a family trust. So there's limited transfer, right, Jackie? It's the
stays in there.
It stays in there. So you start thinking about, I wouldn't say it's all legal, but you start thinking about the plans. Now, for those that, didn't think about super 20 or 30 years ago, you've got vehicles now. You can set it up. You do your SMSF, or whether it's in your retail super fund, you do your family your family trusts. Yep. And you start planning for that. We're much luckier because we can start thinking about it. 20, 30 years ago, people just thought about creating wealth without actually thinking about the tax consequences. But now we can start thinking about it a bit better.
Mm.
So that would be my advice. Go and speak to a tax specialist because I can't give tax advice. But more logically, I'd start putting assets into different vehicles, and then that way you might quite easily just consider transferring over time. You can even start putting kids into SMSFs if you wanted to, if you trusted them. So that's another way you can go about doing it because you can have up to 6 members now in SMSF.
Really?
But
Wow.
yes, but
Good.
the problem then becomes when you pass, then the spouse of your children then also own the
Mm.
SMSF too. So you've got to start thinking about whether you
Control.
want that to happen.
Yeah. And that's the problem as well sometimes with family trusts. It's like control becomes the problem in the next generation. But if you set it up right,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. So I speak to Jackie about estate planning.
Mm. And as I said, like at the moment, we're still incentivized to try and transfer as much wealth as we can through just our will and then structuring that right as well. But as soon as they do start stuffing around with what taxes will apply on death, that's really when people will go, I'm going to try and avoid this as much as possible. What can I do?
Yeah, well, you got to start planning for that now too.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'm advising my clients is if they're going to start proposing this $3 million balance per individual in super, that's fine. We've already worked out we can generate enough income out of it, no dramas. So we're not targeting more than $3 million each in super for those who uber wealthy. Another, this is a bit out of school, but if you've got a few investment properties and you're nervous and you don't like the taxes, but you love property because you're comfortable with it. Actually, no, I won't say it. I won't give advice.
I'll stop the recording. So
you can talk to me offline if you like, but I won't.
yes. So on that note, everyone who's watching the recording, Rob, can you just flick back, please, to the QR code to end so that that's on the screen at the end so people can jump onto the QR code so that they can get into your newsletter, which it's phenomenal that you do something daily. So well done for that. So yeah, jump on, ask Rob some questions. You can see that he's obviously really great at investment classes, pulling together and actually getting a rate of return rather than just set and forget and sticking you into some kind of bond or managed fund that someone else does. Yeah, so
Jackie, thank you for everyone dialing in and giving up your evening. Hopefully you got something out of it.
I'm sure they have. And for those who are live, lucky you, we will continue the conversation.